intimate something in the morning. Got it. So let's see some more. There's a Barbara. I don't know, Furstenberg maybe. Adrian. Anna. Hello, Anna. Karina.
Hello. Hi, Martha.
Oh, good. Hello, Anna. In Poland. Jean Pollock again.
Yes.
Good. Yes. Marissa. Oh, Francis Kelly. Oh, good. Hello there. Oh, good. Joel. Oh, Joel, you and your dog, maybe. I'm not sure.
Hi, baby.
Deb. Hi, Deb. All right. Okay. All right. RDA. So that's RDA. So what does RDA mean? Like Robert something?
Hi, hello there. No, it's my name's Garth Norday. I'm just using someone else's Zoom.
There you go. There you go.
Good to meet you, Martha.
Pleased to meet you. I assume you're from the UK. Yes.
I am, yes. I'm a colleague of Adele's. So.
Oh, good. You're in the North London group.
I'm actually based in Bristol on the west coast of the UK, so of England. So.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anna, now I can see Anna with her books in the background there. And there's Francis. Now I can see Francis. Good. So you don't have to show yourself, but if you do, then I get to have the pleasure of sort of seeing these lovely faces. All right. Well, it's maybe time to start. I'm raring to go. Susan.
I can tell you that the North London group aren't here yet because none of them are here, which doesn't surprise me. Do you want to give them 1 minute? Because I know they're all coming.
Okay. Okay.
I tell you what, I could start with an introduction because they why don't I do that? So welcome everyone. People were just kind of land in the Zoom.
And let me just say, so it is true that Adele is a little bit cutting in and out, and apparently that's Adele's connection. But right.
Thank you for reminding me, Martha. Yeah, sorry. I'm not quite sure why that's happening right now. I'll sit myself a little bit closer to the microphone. Hopefully that might address that problem.
And also, by the way, I wanted to say, Adele, a lot of people said to me that they loved what you said last time about you and me and about you. And they loved it, by the way. So
great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So welcome everyone to the Q&A. So yeah, we set this Q&A up because we realized, having thought we could do the whole thing in one sitting, that not only did we not have time to do it in one sitting, we split it over 2 sessions, a masterclass 1 and a masterclass 2 next week, that we also needed to devote some time to questions and answers and thoughts and reflections and wonderings. So we set this hour up. So I'm not going to take up too much time except to go through a couple of practicals, really. We are recording this, so please be aware of that, and that we would love if you would like to ask a question, either to post it in the chat, or if you're comfortable to use the raise hand function and to ask that, but it will be recorded. And we have a limited time. So, we're really going to ask people to be as succinct as possible, to really limit their curiosities to Martha's paradigm, how it's shown up in their work, maybe during the week. I know a few friends have said, oh, I managed to use some of those statements. So really to kind of enable us all to learn together, we want to keep it quite focused. If you do have a question, could you please state your name when you're unmuted? And then once you've finished your question, perhaps you could mute yourself again. And yeah, we've got loads of ideas, lots of things to think about. I've got a few questions from the chat from last time. So without further ado, I'm hoping that most people are here now. Why don't we get started? Okay. So should we mute everyone now, Robert, just to be sure that we've got that set up? Okay.
That's already in place.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert.
Yeah, so please, everyone, do post in the chat questions, as I said, really reflections, thoughts about what we covered in the masterclass last Saturday. So to start us off, I thought I might ask a couple of questions, one of which I've already mentioned to Martha, but I'm going to bring it to the whole group because I thought we all liked it, which was, Martha has a lovely phrase about sometimes you just have to break the client's heart. And somebody today, Al, who I think is on this call, suggested that we might reframe that slightly and say sometimes you just have to re-break the client's heart. So I wanted to offer that over to you, Martha, to say anything you wanted to about that.
Well, first of all, I want to, can you hear me okay? Good. And also, hi, Ed. Hello, Anita, and DC. Hello, hello, and the others. Anyway, yes, because I had said, so I thank Al for picking up on, yes, re-break the patient's heart. And again, this is along the lines of sort of controlled damage. As I had highlighted, model 2 is a story about, so the corrective provision or deficiency compensation perspective of self-psychology and other deficit theories is a story about grieving disappointment or disillusionment to fill in for structural deficit or impaired capacity. So for the person to be able to grieve, there needs to have been first a positive transference, grieve in the context of the transference, in the context of the relationship. There needs to have been first a positive transference, and it will then feel good for them. But then inevitably, there will be some kind of disappointment or disillusionment or frustration. And it's the working through whereby the patient's heart on some level is re-broken. And that then provides impetus and opportunity for the patient adaptively to internalize whatever good there has been, despite the fact of the early on brokenness of the heart and the here and now re-breaking of the heart. And it will be the transmuting internalization or structure building, and I'm just copying off of self-psychology now, the transmuting internalizations of psychological or self-object functions that the therapist has been providing, despite the fact of the re-breaking of the heart. It'll be the internalizing adaptively of those functions that over time, eventually, by way of serial accretion, there will be a filling in of deficit and a consolidation of the self. If there is never a breaking of the patient's heart, or more accurately, Al, a re-breaking of the patient's heart, then on some level, you rob the patient of the opportunity to work through, in the context of the relationship with you, to work through their heartbreak, their disappointment, their disillusionment. And now let me say, I have in my time embarrassed myself totally by attempting to explain to a patient why grieving is a good thing. You would think I would have done it just once or twice and have gotten it, not a good idea. But I've actually tried some numbers of times relentlessly, hoping that maybe I could get it right in the way I explained it. And they would get it that, oh yes, in grieving, in the aftermath, there'll be the adaptive internalizing of good such that they'll end up ahead of the game. Forget it. Unless you have a better way to describe it than I do, forget it. That's one thing that's hard to explain to a patient, but just to hold firm in your heart, the knowing that when you do re-break their heart, if you can stay the course with them and facilitate their grieving, and in next Saturday, I'll be talking about in Model 2, both which is about optimal disillusionment or affective disillusionment, which is what I've been talking about. I'll be talking about both a grievance statement, which is for the patient who is sort of getting it that what they're wanting isn't happening and they have grievances about it, they're not okay with it. And then a grieving statement where they really are sort of getting it, they're angry about it, upset, heartbroken, and they're beginning to do the grieving. So that'll be Model 2. And in Model 3, so Model 2 is, in essence, in Model 2, when we re-break the patient's heart, we will be helping them work through positive transference disrupted, illusion followed by disillusionment, good followed by bad. And that's the way they adaptively internalize good and accretion of new good. Now, Model 3 is not about absence of good, structural deficit, but presence of bad. These charged toxic pairs of pathogenic introjects or internal bad objects, or in Bill Meissner's terms, pathogenic introjective pairs. And now, because of internal presence of bad, these charged toxic boluses, victimizer, victim, seducer, seducee, abandoner, abandonee, criticizer, criticizee, this dysfunctional relational dynamic will get played out in the treatment, whereby there too, as part of a projective identification, and there are two parts to that: the induction phase, whereby the patient draws the therapist into participating countertransferentially in their compulsive and unwitting reenactment of their unmastered early on relational traumas that have been internalized, introjected as these charged toxic pairs. So the induction phase, you draw the therapist into participating as the old bad object, who will indeed be re-breaking the patient's heart by being judgmental, by being critical, by being seductive, by abandoning. That's the first phase of the projective identification. And it has to be that the therapist becomes the old bad object, some version of it. Then the resolution phase of the projective identification is ushered in when the therapist relents, steps back from what has become a mutual enactment and gains distance and recovers her therapeutic effectiveness thereby, and offers the patient, either verbally or non-verbally, something that can then be reintrojected that's a little bit less toxic than what had been projected, along with sort of as part of that, the patient recognizing that they're not just an innocent victim of this therapist who did this, broke their heart again, but that they themselves, co-creation, had participated on some level in eliciting the response or the reaction that the therapist had provided. I'll give you an example. The patient comes in and says, this woman, I went to a bar last night and I met a man, and it's sort of like pretty cool. It was very exciting. And I went back to his place and we had sex. And, you know, actually, we didn't use protection. So I realized technically, you know, I could have gotten a sexually transmitted disease. I mean, I guess I could have gotten pregnant, whatever. Now I think you're going to be critical. Well, not that you're overwhelmingly critical, but on the other hand, it is true that you sort of like, and whether you, not that you necessarily say sort of like, wow, that was a little tricky, wasn't it? But let's say they sense, despite your, you know, they sense that, quite frankly, you have reacted a little bit, you're a little taken aback, whatever. It's the negotiating at Darlene Ehrenberg's intimate edge that will be part of processing that, whereby the therapist will acknowledge, quite possibly, that yes, there was a part of her that found itself, you know, reacting a little bit like, whoa, a little bit with, oh, isn't that a little tricky, a little risky? But then helping the patient understand her contribution to what then followed, so that ultimately, by way of serial dilution, working through negotiating at the intimate edge, these ongoing cycles of projection and then and mutual enactment, and then the therapist recovering a perspective and then returning to the patient, an amalgam, part the original toxic projection and part the slightly modified something that goes back to the patient. So in both, and that's the experience of working through the negative transference, because it involves negative misperceptions, pathogenic introjects, internal bad objects. So I hope you're understanding both involve re-breaking the patient's heart. In model 2, it's going to be the experience of good become bad. In model 3, the experience of bad become good. Bad become less than that. It's not so bad after all. So model 2 is about positive transference disrupted, and model 3 is about negative transference. All right. So thank you, Al, for that. I kind of went on a little bit there, but it's one of my favorite somethings.
Thank you, Martha. Now, the questions are starting to come in the chat. I mean, there's so many themes here. Robert, shall I just start one and then you step in with another? Well, Brian asks, hi, Brian. I've heard it said, and in fact, it may have been you that said it, Martha, that one aspect of psychological emotional health is the capacity to hold ambivalence. It seems many of your intervention statements have this as their goal. Would you agree?
Oh, beautiful. And thank you. Brian, thank you for that. Yes, it is true. It is true, I think. And the capacity to hold in mind simultaneously, whether it's the good and the bad aspects of your experience, or the ambivalence that you have, the conflict that you have, and whether we call it libidinal object constancy or evocative memory capacity, which I'd referenced last time, which borderlines have an impaired ability to have, or just regularly, that most of us are conflicted and ambivalent about most things most of the time. So yes, to hold in mind both parts of anything. But that then leads to what I referenced also last time, the importance of dual awareness, which is also about holding in mind two parts, both what you're experiencing in the moment with your heart and what you're observing or reflecting upon with your head. And dual awareness in life and in all the treatments and period is a good something to have, so that even as you're experiencing it, you can step back from the immediacy of it to observe and reflect upon. And going through life in that way, will make your life work a little better for you. And so, and actually, Kate Stone mentioned something to me that was very helpful in this past week. Remember, I mentioned that quote that everybody loves, that everybody thinks Viktor Frankl said, though he didn't, but it's as if he said it. Between the stimulus and the response. I wanted to sort of reframe that a little bit. Between the stimulus and what follows is space. And in that space is the opportunity either, and I'm paraphrasing, to react defensively or to respond adaptively. And actually, Kate was mentioning that in a way, if we think in terms of dual awareness and appreciating moment by moment as best you can, that you're both feeling something, but observing it and feeling and observing, that creates a little more space for you, so that when ultimately the thing that follows the stimulus will be more likely to be in the direction of an adaptive response. So pausing a little bit to create a space between the stimulus and what follows, so that with your dual awareness, you can more easily advance to an adaptive response instead of just a defensive reaction. Something more thoughtful and reflective rather than just reactive and perhaps defensive. So thank you, Brian. Thank you for that. Next.
Okay, so Joel says, I have had some luck using Martha's style of saying, e.g., even though you know you have to find a way to accept this heartbreak and grieve, it just feels like there's no way to do that.
Oh, yes. Yes, Joel Henkin, I think, yes. Yeah.
That soon lets me say a bit at a time. Everybody tells us we're supposed to grieve, to get over it, but they never say how to do that. And what's strange about grieving is that nobody knows quite how it works. What we do know more about is stuff that interferes with grieving. And unfortunately, over time, that turns out to be enough. So,
all righty.
Thank
you, Joel. Thank you, Joel. All right. So let me talk a little bit more about Model 2. So, which is the goal of which, so whereas Model 1, the goal is more interpretive, Model 2 is more grieving and about affect and experience and grieving of disappointment. And Model 3 is about negotiating at Darlene Ehrenberg's intimate edge. And Model 4 is about surrendering to, analytic oneness in the context of the treatment. All right, Model 2, it's about ultimately facilitating grieving. Now, what does that really mean? So I'll at least I'll say a few things generally, and then sort of be talking a little bit more about disillusionment statements to facilitate grieving. So more generally, it really means that the place needs to be safe enough and a soft enough landing that the person can bring themselves into what they're feeling and not needing to defend against it. Because if they're MIA or overwhelmed and shut down, then there's not going to be any real grieving done. There won't be the occasion for that. So grieving in Model 2, a disillusionment statement, here we go. 3 parts. The first part, you had so, and this is optimally stressful. Again, remember, I talk about optimal stress, or Hans Selye's eustress, EUSTRESS, as opposed to distress in Hans Selye's words. I call this optimal stress. Just the right balance between challenge, which will create impetus for some kind of destabilization, but then support, which will provide opportunity for a restabilization at a higher level, a different level of adaptive capacity and flexibility. So here we go. 3 parts for a disillusionment statement. You had so hoped that I would answer that question, or those kinds of questions, or that your mother would answer those kinds of questions, whether it's in the transference, in the treatment, the relationship, or with respect to an object on the outside. Let's do ourselves. You had so hoped that I would answer that question. First part. But the conjunction, really important. You are beginning to realize that I really don't tend to answer those kinds of questions. Now, do they know that? Well, yes, you've been working together for some time now. They get it. They don't like it that you don't answer those kinds of questions, but they are beginning to get it that, quite frankly, you really don't tend to answer those kinds of questions, unless, in fact, you're being a bit seductive, Fairbairn, in which case sometimes you do and sometimes you don't, which makes it a little trickier. So consistency, of course, making it a little easier to get this said. You had so hoped that I would answer those kinds of questions for you, would tell you what to do. But you're beginning to understand, you're beginning to get it, that I don't tend to answer those kinds of questions. And it breaks your heart, and it angers you, and it upsets you. And you find yourself just wishing that I would, but you're beginning to realize that I don't, and it breaks your heart, and it angers you, and it upsets you. Part of grieving, of course, is both sadness and anger. Now, let me do, I'm going to call that a grieving statement. It's a particular kind of disillusionment statement. But only more recently, I've realized that there's also something I want to call a grievance statement. Grievances are for people who aren't really grieving, but rather are fetching and complaining about something. So here's a grievance statement. You had so hoped that I would answer those kinds of questions, but you're beginning to realize that I really don't tend to offer that kind of advice. And you are absolutely outraged. How dare me not to be answering those kinds of questions? It makes you blah, 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 blah. And now can you feel that they are upset, they are angry, they are complaining? It is not okay. This is a grievance statement. Grieving involves confronting a reality, or more specifically, I talk about confronting the reality of the patient's separate limitations, separateness, and immutability. The fact that they can't be forced to be something you happen to want them to be. And so it is that you keep coming up against, and you want them to change and to come through for you in the way that probably early on it wasn't consistently and reliably there for you. So you now want it by way of displacement, not projection, but by way of displacement, want it now from your current object. So grieving then involves repeatedly, it's a process, ongoing process of you had so hoped, but are beginning to realize, and it's devastating, and it upsets you, and it is painful. And I know that I have found when I am patient and willing to sort of, in essence, be with them as they do their grieving. And I myself, sometimes wearing collusion, we are with the illusion of us as being able to offer them something that they wanted and that we too would have wanted to be able to provide. So sometimes it's that we are both grieving the reality that much as we would have wanted it to be otherwise, we had so hoped it could be, we're realizing that it's not really working that way, and it breaks our heart. So sometimes we actually grieve with the patient. Well, so those are some thoughts about grieving. Thank you, Joel, and your dog. And feel better, Joel. Yes.
Thank you, Martha. There is a little question just to distinguish. I think I'm going to go to the I'm going to jump, Ed, sorry, I'm going to jump over your question because I think Martha's addressed it. But Teresa says, are you able to give examples from one or more models for addressing erotic transference, which may be positive and or negative?
Oh, interesting. Thank you, Teresa Tisdale. An example. Well, first of all, I do think that one can have a positive erotic or a negative erotic transference to either a male or a female, but experience them, a therapist, but experience them as the, whatever. I'm not saying that very well, but you don't have to just have sexual feelings towards the sexual orientation preference or whatever. So as a woman, I have men and women who have erotic positive and erotic negative feelings towards me. Let's see, and the question, can I give an example? Well, a patient who was quite insistent, really wanted for us to be friends. And it was a woman, and a tinge of just truly wanting some kind of friendship, combined with some erotic elements, and sort of dreaming and fantasizing about the two of us sort of being able to live together and be intimate, physically intimate, sexual, and she yearned and longed for that. It had aspects of both positive and negative, as I guess, referencing back to Ryan's both feelings. I mean, the positive and the negative were kind of mixed in there. I've certainly also had men who, yes, had an erotic transference, and sometimes it's not always easy for it to be acknowledged, or even easy for the therapist, me, to be sort of naming it and so on. But I mean, I think I would say it also, this isn't a great answer, but I think there too, it's a process of working it through. Any kind of feeling, positive or negative, that you have for the therapist, you work it through. As it will involve probably some model 3, the intersubjective perspective of contemporary relational theory, and negotiating at the intimate edge, and dealing with disappointment and upset and anger, and whether there's been seductiveness or not, and just sort of cycles of just working through. So that's not a great answer, but I think that's the best I can do in the moment. So thank you, Teresa.
It all depends on how comfortable you are with being an erotic object as the starting point.
Thank you. That's a good point, Robert. Good point.
So we have a question from Philip. Hi, Martha. Model 3 introduces...
Is this Phil Walker? Phil Walker?
Yes, Phil Walker, yeah.
Good.
Model 3 introduces projective identification, but are not identifications and enactment involved in our choice of any intervention, including Model 1 and 2?
I'm sorry, say it again.
Model 3 introduces projective identification, but are not identifications and enactment involved in our choice of any intervention, including Model 1 and 2?
Oh, said he, very relationally oriented. Yes, and by the way, grieving's involved in all of them, and also interpreting, and by the way, surrendering to resources, dependence on the therapist, and so on. All of them are sort of involved in everything, but there's the primacy of, or the privileging of, what's getting played out at the intimate edge in Model 3. However, any interpretation, Model 1 interpretation that we make, obviously does, yes, indeed, Phil, have aspects of, enactment on our part. Obviously important here is that we either in peer supervision or individual supervision or deep self-reflection and our own treatments and our own therapies, that we be ever busy, attuned to, our own biases, prejudices, our own subjectivities, so that when we make what we thought was a Model 1 interpretation, that we're not, that indeed we might well be, there's a relational component, and we're a little bit either challenging the patient a little bit extra because of our own issues. I'm aware, for example, that my mother was a smoker until my brother and I, I love my brother. I love my mother. Eventually, I love my mother. But anyway, my brother and I, the Surgeon General's report had come out in 1964 about cancer and smoking. And so my brother and I were just tormented, my mother, and about her smoking. And bless her, she ultimately, as a Christmas present to us, she stopped her smoking. And she said that for herself alone, she would have wanted to keep doing it. But because she loved us and for our sakes, she was going to stop smoking. And parenthetically, she died in her 90s, and it wasn't from lung anything. So she stopped her smoking. However, I am aware, and that was, by the way, the best Christmas present I've ever gotten, that Mom would have done that for us. But I am aware that smoking, when I have patients who are heavy duty smokers, I have feelings about that, countertransferential feelings that I haven't yet fully worked through. So I tend not to, and most patients, it's the smokers, it tends to be pretty egocentric, so they're not busy mentioning it as an issue. I know they smoke, but they're not mentioning it as an issue. So I tend to steer clear of that for their own sake, as well as my own, because I know I have too much caught up in that. So an interpretation that I might make in Model 1, you know that as long as you continue to smoke in the way that you do, you run the risk of getting cancer, lung cancer, but you find yourself feeling that's truly the only thing that affords you any real relief from all the stress that you're living with these days. I have to be very careful. If I say that, I need to be very careful that I'm not clearly indicating that I disapprove of their smoking, which quite frankly, I do. And now, by the way, all of you on the call here, forgive me, because there could well be some heavy smokers in your midst, in which case I probably possibly alienated myself here. But anyway, I was giving that as an example of, in response to Phil's thing, yes, that indeed interpretation is involved in all of them. Grieving and affect is involved in all of them. Negotiating at the intimate edge in all of them. Overcoming the dread of surrender to resourceless dependence or analytic oneness in Model 4. All of them. Interdependent, mutually enhancing, not mutually exclusive.
Thank you, Martha. That's helpful. I'm going to go to Ed in a minute. I had one question of my own, actually, which was something that came up in our group today, which is the kind of the realization for me that the interpretation isn't actually for insight, it's for opening up the body-mind process. I don't know if that resonates with you, but I think we can get caught thinking it's for insight. And you mentioned Alan Shaw in your slides. I wondered if you wanted to say anything to that.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I too sort of read that paper that Michael Soth, bless him, had sent along, the different ways to look at interpretation. And actually, what's interesting is I call this, because this is going to be the name of my book, The Art and the Science of Interpretation. And then I proceed not really to talk much at all about interpretation per se, as about interventions, minimally stressful and optimally stressful interventions. And I just sort of glide over the issue of interpretation, because interpretation is such a sort of charged issue and has had so many different meanings in its time. So in Model 1, the optimally stressful interventions do tend to have the goal of increased awareness, a la Freud, a little more cognitive. But it's also true that that can open up an avenue to greater awareness of one's interoceptive or proprioceptive, or whatever the word is, sense, that it's a question of degrees and steps. But so, yes, for me, Model 1, but Model 1 is just one of 5 or perhaps 6 models. And that is, yes, insight, awareness, cognitive tends to be, yes, but I like what your group is talking about, your relational group, and a more embodied approach. And I've been reminded that my Model 5 actually involves some embodiedness. My people in my William James College course have helped me to understand that. So embodiment is relevant also for my quantum neuroscientific approach. Anyway, be that as it may. So thank you, Adele. Mm-hmm. Now, and Ed has a question, I guess. Is that the thought? Ed Gutfrund? There, Ed, good. Unmute yourself. Bottom left. Bottom left.
Okay, there it is.
There you go.
Now you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so what you just said, I think, is does anticipate my question a little bit. We're thinking about your empathic statements, and I really appreciate how you want to keep those really clean and direct. And my question is, how do you empathize with somatic expression? So somebody's posture shifts, or somebody's shoulders tighten, or they pull back, and
So I'm not going to say anything necessarily. In model 3, where the focus is a little more on the here and now engagement in the here and now, if they sort of shift a little bit, I bet I'm going to shift a little bit. I have one patient where I was realizing that every time she sort of did something like this, I myself mirrored it and did the same thing. And I think Les Havens and some of the others have done some wonderful, they've done some EMGs, electromusculograms, something like that, whatever, of the therapist and the patient, and how they are often in sync, non-verbally in sync. So that would be more model 3, what's going on in the here and now. And it does involve also the body, non-verbal, and the body.
so that can be an expression between you and a client or patient. And what I'm wondering is there a statement that goes with it? I ask questions and you don't ask questions, but is there a way to bring the awareness forward that's useful?
I say so painful. I mean, they go, at whatever, and I just might say so painful. And remember, I always like, when I can, to get the mileage of the associated theme. So painful, this reminder of how your mother never understood. So I don't tend to say, I noticed that your body tightened a little bit. I used to say stuff like that. I don't know. I don't say that so much anymore. I've kind of lost interest in that. But that's one can do that. I just don't tend to do that. I tend more to just sort of feel it and to pick up on it and to put that there into words. But not, I notice you did. I tend, it feels to me, my concern might be the way I would do it. It might make the person a little self-conscious. So I don't. I'm just going to read it. I'm going to feel it. So again, in model 2, as an empathic self-object, the 1.5 person perspective, and we bring the best of who we are as an empathic self-object, self-psychology. In model 3, I actually make a distinction between empathy and authenticity. In model 3, we're more an authentic subject participating in a co-created relationship with the patient. And it's the here and now and what's going on in the space between us, which, yes, is relevant for model 1 and model 2, but the focus now, the primacy, the privileging of that in model 3, where we're more in the moments when, and maybe the previous moment, model 1, the next moment, model 4, and then model 5. So we're back and forth seamlessly, not seamlessly, but back and forth all the time, theoretically seamlessly between the different models. That they're bodily something, or the prosody, or some of the nonverbal stuff, the extra clearing of their throat, that will have an impact a little bit more on me in the here and now engagement in the analytic or therapeutic endeavor, model 3.
Yes. And how do you rate, or is it important that people somehow recognize their physical, the feeling that comes in a gesture? Is that important in your way of understanding and processing?
I see.
That's what I'm trying to get at. I'm sorry.
Yes. Well, I've taken the training with my dear friend Pat Ogden, sensory
Sure.
motor psychotherapy, and certainly Peter Levine's somatic experiencing, and they would they get chills up and down their spine if they heard me saying this. I'm less inclined, and I think it's an issue. It's a problem with me, but I'm less inclined these days to be wanting them to recognize the relationship between the gastrointestinal distress and upset that they're feeling, and that they're anxious and worried about something. I don't emphasize that as much as I used to, and as much as I perhaps could in the future. I don't tend to do that. I think part of it also is maybe with COVID, where I'm just not seeing people in person. And
Yes.
so and also with the fact that certainly over the years, I've done therapy and supervision by phone. And then I have my analytic patients who are on the couch, and though I can see it if their leg kicks up or something, quite frankly, I can't really see their body because of where I'm sitting, and they're on the analytic couch. So I could be faulted, and forgive me, Pat, and forgive me, Peter, and forgive me, Al Peso. I'm not focused as much on that as perhaps I could be.
Yes. Yeah.
But I
So-
feel, I mean, if there were to be blank spaces in a treatment where I just sort of ran out of stuff, then sort of like, well, maybe I should be focusing on that. But there's just so much ongoing all the time.
yeah.
There's such a rich, in fact, I remember when I was getting my training to be a child psychiatrist at Mass Mental Health Center in Boston there, I would see my private patients at the end of the day. And so I was seeing this couple and in my office, my little office, and the power went out, as it often did at Mass Mental. And it was nighttime now, very late, and it became completely dark. And I said, oh my God, I'm so sorry, we can reschedule. And they said, no, let's keep talking. And so they then proceeded to have one of the most impactful couples therapy sessions we'd ever had. They started to talk about their sexual relationship and all sorts of stuff that had never really been talked about before, when I couldn't really see them and they couldn't even see each other. It was so dark. So I think that there's certain things. I'm also aware that when you see someone in person, issues around weight, how much they weigh, can be more charged. Whereas I have one woman whom I've been doing, we don't even do Zoom, we do it by phone. I've been providing medical backup once a month, every 4 weeks, medicine for her, a little begrudgingly, but I do that for the last 30 years. And so I've never seen her, I've never met her. So we get to talk about her weight very openly, because she'll say, I've really packed on the pounds, and she doesn't feel much shame because she knows I can't see it. So she just keeps me updated on how her weight is doing, in a way that with some patients who come in person, it can be a little more charged. But anyway, I kind of went far afield there, but thank you, Ed. You've helped me. I know you're very much a body oriented in a wonderful, good way clinician, in addition to being many other things. And so I know I should do a little more of that probably.
Well, thank you. It's useful to hear your perspective on this. And I especially am reminded about what things cause people's self-consciousness, which might up the ante from mildly disruptive to more optimally maybe, but yeah, but not that it be disturbing. But I just remain curious about how their awareness of their own physical experience is contributing.
I think that in addition to, and again, I just say, well, my spiritual thing will be model 7. I don't emphasize or focus as much on the spiritual piece either. Now, I imagine to myself that I'm spiritual and evolved and all the good stuff, but no, I mean, I have further development to do in that way. But I think those of you who read my email got it, that based on our time last Saturday, I was optimally incentivized to shake a leg and get a move on it with my Model 6. So I'll just say it real quick, because I'm a little bit excited about this. And again, as I say in the email, I do have, though, a decade, please, till 2030 to develop this fully. But anyway, so it is a whole Model 6, a holistic approach to healing. And it involves advancing the patient from the defense of restricted flow, there's the R word, the defense, restricted flow of Dan Siegel's and mine and other people's, Dietrich Klinghardt and them other folks, restricted flow of information and energy throughout the divine matrix, Greg Braden, extracellular matrix, mind-body matrix, as I call it. Anyway, advancing the patient from restricted flow, there's the defense, to accelerated flow, there's the A word, of information and energy throughout the system, by way of working through, and since this is a holistic approach, there's not cognitive dissonance, affective disillusionment, these are the optimal stressors, relational detoxification, the D words, existential dependence, quantum disentanglement, holistic dyshomeostasis. The thought that working through holistic, any of the body systems and so on, because the extracellular matrix is in charge of all of them. It has now been officially named just recently an organ system, the extracellular matrix. Hey. But anyway, the thought being that disrupted orderedness of the mind-body matrix manifests as psychological and physiological disorders, prompting thereby disrupted ease of flow of information and energy throughout, manifesting as psychological and physiological diseases. So I think that the holistic approach, isn't that called disorders, diseases, disorderedness of the matrix and disrupted ease of flow of information and energy. And I really do feel that the more generally, as we are being continuously impacted bombarded by the myriad of environmental stressors, energetic stressors, psychological, physiological, external, internal stressors coming our way, the better we can, with adaptability, variability, Tom Brady's pliability, the better we can process and integrate and ultimately adapt by facilitating the flow and the processing of it, all the better. Whereas if there are imbalances or blockages or obstructions to the flow, then they'll be impaired and there'll be dysfunction and impaired capacity to have orderedness and ease. So anyway, thank you, folks. That's I get till 2030, please. But that's my holistic approach.
Thank you, Martha. That's a wonderful articulation.
Thank you. Thank you. And I presented some of those ideas in the integrative medicine world, and it seems to go okay. So I have confidence that I can bring some of that into this world and to flesh things out. And then from 2030 to 2040 will be the spiritual. And and the holistic approach will also involve like the neuro-emotional technique. Thank you from last time, Kayana, and you know, somatic experiencing and much more. That will also involve more proprioceptive, interoceptive, and bodily stuff. So maybe that's where we'll get the body in more. Yeah, somatic stuff, sensations, etc. So okay,
Michael.
oh Michael, there's Michael. Oh my God. Oh my God. I do have to say, I mean, I don't mean to get totally carried away, but oh my God. You and I have sort of known each other from a distance for some decades. And that's just quite wonderful, quite wonderful. And I hear about you all the time. And I read your articles, quite frankly. And I so appreciated your review of my book, Modes of Therapeutic Action, like 25 years ago. And it's wonderful to see you, Michael. So.
Thank you. Thank
I
you.
guess people can tell from my bodies, and I'm excited and pleased to see Michael.
Can I continue why Pat Ogden and Peter Levine would tear their hair out that you're not making more somatic interventions? I think you may have good reasons to be reluctant. You see, from my original training, I should be all in favor of somatic interventions like Ed was talking about. However, from a more integrative perspective, I think we do begin to understand that problem of making the person more self-conscious. And I think that's a good reason to be reluctant about making those kinds of interventions. So then you're sort of saying, well, it's just not my thing anymore. I used to do it more. Maybe I will do it again. But I think you have a very good, I'm assuming you have a very good rationale for going easy on those types of interventions. And my assumption is that in the moment where you're noticing that kind of invitation for the client to reflect on their somatic experience in the moment, that in that moment there is some kind of transferential constellation, because somebody becoming self-conscious is vis-a-vis another.
Yeah. You don't become self-conscious all by yourself, right?
So then in that moment, there is a transferential implication to what you maybe might have meant as, or I might have meant as an invitation for the client to attend to their body.
I see.
There's a transferential complication that might make us hesitate in using those interventions quite as liberally as maybe Pat Ogden and Peter Levine would.
Are able to do. Oh, bless you, Michael. Yeah, I mean, I not to piggyback on that, but yes, and yes. I mean, I guess that is right. I guess that is right. Now, I do know that what Pat and Peter are able to do, as was Alpesso and some of them others, they're able to, Janina Fisher and so on, they're able to have you really focus on it. And really, I mean, it's body-oriented work. And have you, process it and complete the trauma, process it through your system. But I mean, that's not, that's not my particular, at this point, area of expertise, and so on. And yes, just having them notice, if you will, that when you get anxious, you start to, bite your nails, you start to move around more. I'm less inclined to do that, right? Because make them self-conscious. Thank you, Michael. That's, I really appreciate
Well,
that.
there is another possibility that I don't quite imagine that for all their genius and expertise, that they can quite get around the transference of making somebody self-conscious. And who is that person that is making the client self-conscious with those interventions? I think there's another possibility. One can make that kind of intervention and be interested in the transferential constellation that is making them self-conscious. Because what do they mean by self-conscious? They basically feel judged by you.
And it's so interesting because I am less interested in sort of generating a situation than saying, let's look at this, let's understand. It's true, I tend to be, thank you, Michael, right. I tend myself over time, the patient leads and I follow. Yeah, and so I don't want to be saying, I noticed that when I mentioned that, I did sort of, I don't want to do that. So if they say, I noticed that I get very anxious, then I'm all on board. So thank you, that's right. It's truly true for me that the patient leads and I follow. Now, I'm a smart follower, and every now and then I do what Les Havens, I know Robert Downs loves Les Havens, I do an extension. And so I kind of elaborate a little bit. And I mean, I'm no dummy and I get to sort of elaborate a little bit, but they lead and I follow. So yeah, I wouldn't tend to, because I would be creating a transferential situation, and I'm not going to be like busy seductively inviting it and then sort of, well, now let's talk about it. So thank you, Michael. Wow. Whew.
That makes the rationale for your reluctance much more explicit. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Wow. Wow. Whew. Wow.
May I just annotate that a little bit, given that dialogue? I think what Michael points to is, well, what I see, and also an email that came into my inbox today about the therapist regulating the client, that this biological reductionism of a nervous system that needs regulating, that erases the transferential and the bad object. And I think that you've just kind of indirectly spoken about that. Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Wow. Gosh, that's so interesting. Thank you, Robert, and thank you, Michael. Any other questions here from the chat? Or anybody, anything?
Robert, want to pull up anything from the chat?
There's a couple of things here, I think. Re your holistic approach. You mentioned muscle testing last week. Do you
I did applied kinesiology.
Use that?
Well, I mean, I don't officially use it, but I myself, for many years, went to a holistic practitioner who used electrodermal testing, the Vitel machine. And so different substances he would put on the tray, and he would test to see if it was an inflammatory reaction on your body's part or a degenerative reaction on your body's part. And that would then help you to know what the doses should be of your supplements, et cetera, et cetera. And certainly, the one of, the O-ring, this, and you can do this to people sometimes. Oh, and I have a pendulum. I use my pendulum. My dear Dr. Doris Rapp gave me a pendulum, and I just cherish it, and may she rest in peace. And I use the pendulum, and I sort of don't know for sure that I'm actually able to use it, except that I hold it and it's very still, and I show me a yes and it goes clockwise. Show me a no, goes counterclockwise. And I've even had my dear sweet Gunnar hold my hand. And of course, that then brings his energy into the field, but whatever. And it's still, I can still kind of a little bit for yes, go clockwise, and for no, go counterclockwise. And then I can every now and then, I don't think it's very accurate, but every now and then I think it's a little bit accurate. So people, in the hands of experienced people, muscle testing, applied kinesiology, oh my God, yes, our body remembers, our body knows all sorts of stuff. And it's for us to be able to tap into the wisdom of the body. Yeah, Walter Buchanan's wisdom of the body.
Thank
So
you, Mark.
I believe in it. Oh, and let me say, and then other things. I mean, there are other pieces. I have so many pieces of, medical little somethings, the Avasia, the My Health Pro device, Alpha Stim, Juve red light, the Chi machine. I mean, I have about 25 different things. I would never recommend any of them unless I myself have tried them. So I do these things that work with, facilitating the flow of information and energy throughout the system. And I love it. And I think it's very legit. It's a whole realm that I look forward to being able to explore more of, and so on.
Thank you. I'm
Thank
smiling.
you.
I know we've only got, Ed, I know you've got your hand up. There's a question from Francis. We've only got 6 minutes, and she says something quite
Francis
interesting.
Kelly? Is this Francis Kelly? Yes.
I would argue that self-conscious and self-aware are distinctive. Some patients experience attention to the body as self-conscious, and some as becoming more self-aware. What are your thoughts?
Oh, good. Yeah, that's good. That's good. For a patient who does experience it, attention to the body as self-aware, right on. That's fabulous. That's fabulous. Yeah. And for other patients who become then a bit self-conscious, there would be a difference between self-aware and self-conscious. Oh, very good. Very, very nice point. Nice, nuanced something there, Francis. Thank you for that. All right, some more questions here.
Ed had his hand up. Do you still want to ask?
Good. Ed again? Good. Unmute yourself, Ed.
Yes. Well, this is a little continuity, but I'm very fascinated by this transference, countertransference things that have just been brought up. And I hadn't given much consideration to that. And what I sort of work with is my version of inquiry is often a kind of experiment to help people find out what are they, like what happens if you move this way or you don't move this way, or what happens when you're paying attention to your immediate, in the moment response to what you and I are doing. It reminds me about how everything is co-created and how's everything connected to everything else, which I think you would
yes,
validate. So
see, my hearing, and for me, that for me, my own style is more directive. What is it like for you when I whatever? It's sort of like so much your agenda. And I'm a little more inclined towards Daniel Goleman's agenda, less presence, or Tara Brach's a mindful witness. And I have eased away from the asking of questions because I'm curious or because I want them to have increased awareness of. So it's not wrong or anything, but I know for myself, as I hear you talk, I'm like, well, what's it like for you when I mention this? It feels to me, for me, it's more directive than my psychodynamic synergy paradigm is intended to be. But I know there's a whole other way of, and some people focus in much more on the spiritual in a way that I don't know if you do, but I don't. So they're different somethings, but
yes.
Yeah. So I guess the issue becomes more generally to what extent. Now, again, I mean, I was trained at the Boston Psychoanalytic. It's very conservative and pretty much one person. And so on and so forth, and some fair bit of white supremacy and other such, I guess probably one could say. But it was about sort of not, well, free association. And letting the patient, although even as it was a little bit recognized that there is no such thing as free association, even though I think Tony Chris wrote a book called Free Association, but it isn't really, because of course there's always the relational piece, and nobody just sort of suddenly just sort of says something. It has to do with what's gone on in the moments, weeks, months, years before. So, but so I was raised more in terms of letting the patient. Now, I have over time realized that if we're not careful and we let the patient totally lead the way, then we might be talking about a 30-year analysis. So there are times indeed where I will, with a minimally stressful intervention, and actually, I think next Saturday I'll be mentioning more about what Terry Real talks about, where he talks about with a sort of, I'm calling it an empathic intervention, but where he sort of names some, difficult and painful truths that, quite frankly, the patient really does know, even though they would rather not think about it. And so you're moving the ball forward a little bit, you're advancing the ball a little bit. So the patient's talking, and you don't necessarily just say, I wonder if you felt that in relation to your mother, but rather you're teasing out this painful, difficult truth that's sort of been their secret, and you're teasing it out and getting it. Yes, and getting it named so that you're not just letting the patient, just do their thing. You're intervening when and as it feels appropriate, with a minimally stressful, or when the moment feels right, an optimally stressful intervention, where yes, you do have, you do have a bit of an agenda, but not, and I know that Adele had talked about the uninvested therapist. I know we've had a lot of talking about that. And for me, one of the things in that is that it's important. This is an important thought here, and Adele has helped me with this, that it's important that we not be too invested in getting the patient better, getting them to understand the relationship between what their body's doing and what that might mean, and just making the patient, we, if we're not careful, are being a little too relentless there in our need for them to sort of get better, and our upset and our anger and our frustration when they don't just get better or understand the interpretation or do the grieving or negotiate with us at the intimate edge or overcome their dread of surrender to resources dependence on us, or do actualizing action in model 5 as they disentangle quantum disentanglement from the toxicity of their past. So if we're too invested in the patient getting better, and now if we are invested, that's not the worst thing. I mean, doesn't mean that we're bad people, but it does mean that we're probably creating a field, an energetic field, whereby we are yes, yes, and they are no, 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 oh, but yes, yes, oh, but no, no. And that's why, harkening back to what Brian said at the beginning about the ambivalence, holding both sides, that with a lot of my interventions and just with my minimally stressful 2 parts both and statement and my emphasis on dual awareness, I'm thinking to the importance of being able to name both and Robert had asked me what was I sort of into these days, and I'm in the process of working on it. So I may sound a little naive here, but the Hegelian dialectic is how I'd answered him, and the idea of thesis, which is the original proposition, maybe the defense, maybe same old, but in any event, the original proposition, then the antithesis, the negation of the thesis. And I call that Houston, we have a problem. That may be a little more relevant for the United States, but I hope it's understandable. Houston, we have a problem is the antithesis. And then the synthesis, the third and final step in the Hegelian dialectic, is figuring out some way for there to be a reconciliation of 2 seemingly opposing stances. And so I've, over time, whereas I used to be more into either or, my thing that I do in October at William James College, their folks, including Brian and the others, help me to understand that it's a both and, that a lot of things are both and. And so in my model 4, a facilitation statement where we have relational absence as the defense, there's the R word, and authentic presence as the adaptation on the part of the patient. The facilitation statement would go as follows. A part of you is yearning and longing to be understood, seen, heard, And another part of you, but I used to say but anyway, and another part of you is terrified of being found. And if you get it right, you name both parts, they're like, yeah. I mean, how can they fight you on that? I mean, you kind of covered the whole thing. You know, part of you is yearning and longing to be found, and another part of you is terrified of being found. So the two-sidedness of things, and naming them both, so that you don't get into struggles with patients. I listen to colleagues of mine presenting cases at case conferences, and they're like struggling with their patients all the time. I don't tend to struggle with my patients. One, I'm just not into that, and two, I just not. I mean, if I don't have it right, then okay, let me, and I mentioned before that I do the take back concept, or as someone pointed out, or a first draft, that so that we work together to sort of name some subjective realities and define things so that we are both on the same page and working together, co-creating both the re-breaking of heart, but also co-creating successful synthesis of seemingly irreconcilable stances in life, adaptive resolutions in essence. So that's kind of what I'm into.
If I could say one quick thing,
Yes.
you've talked about, I think it was in the Modes book, where you talked about being able to nimbly navigate from one model to another.
Ideally.
Yes. And what keeps me coming back to all these classes with you is that you keep reminding me to be nimble with whatever I think I know and what a whole bunch of stuff that I don't know. So thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you for that. Yes, that people will wonder, people keep wanting to think, well, first you do model 2, get them to feeling safe. And then you do model 1, do some interpretations. But then when those don't go so well, then you do model 3 and you start negotiating the intimate edge. And if you're not getting anywhere, then you got to do model 4. You got to really let them regression in the benign regression, Michael Balin, regression in the service of the ego and of the treatment and so on. But no. Moment by moment, we're ever busy deciding whether we think interpreting a little more cognitive, or model 1, more affective, resonating with their experience and grieving and so on, model 2, negotiating at the intimate edge, model 3, the intersubjective space here, or model 4, really helping them to dare to surrender to settling into analytic oneness. Ofra Ethel, the Israeli psychoanalyst, or Michael Balin's the blissful state of peaceful merger. I've said that to some patients, and I mean, they just melt hearing the words. I mean, it's like, oh, okay, wow, that's Michael Balin there, but whatever. And then model 5 is for when model 1 awareness, model 2 acceptance, model 3 accountability, model 4 accessibility or authentic presence. When those aren't enough, and you have model 5 analysis paralysis, but analysis paralysis, that's not an R word. So the defense has to be refractory inertia, but in essence, analysis paralysis, and where you really need to help them become quantumly disentangled from same old, and advance them to more action. There's the A word, and actualization of potential. And in model 5, and I know we're running out of time here a little bit, please, you can obviously drop off if you need to. In model 5, therapeutic memory reconsolidation, one of my favorite concepts, which also I checked in with Dick Schwartz, and he said, yep. He said, that's relevant for IFS as well. And I went, whew, thank goodness. Anyway, so therapeutic memory reconsolidation, where from my point of view, you are rather more directively, now you are being more directively juxtaposing somewhat forcefully, repeatedly, and with some emphasis, that they're old bad narratives, and often zeroing in on their embodied sense of old bad, juxtaposing that with new good, something new, different, and better, and back and forth, making use of that window, therapeutic window of reconsolidation, whereby if you get it right, that 4 to 6 hour window, if you get it right, then you may well be able, some of them folks say, David Feinstein and some of the others say, and Bruce Ecker, you can actually eradicate the old bad beliefs, core beliefs, narratives, and so on, and replace them with something new, different, and better. So it's not even, say, them folks who, therapeutic memory reconsolidation folks, and with the EMDR does that too, EMDR and hypnotherapy. One of my supervisees, I said, well, hypnotherapy, that's kind of therapeutic memory reconsolidation. And he said, yeah, I mean, it's the Pope Catholic. I mean, that's exactly what happens, where you juxtapose old, bad, new, good, old, bad, new, good. And model 5, my model 5 finally is sort of appreciating that even with awareness, model 1, acceptance, model 2, accountability, model 3, and availability, authentic presence, model 4, that might not get it done. And you have friends who've been in analysis forever. And you know, you look at them and they say, oh my gosh, it's wonderful being in analysis. And meanwhile, you look at them and you think, yeah, you know, we really haven't changed much at all. So model 5, then, when there's refractory inertia or rootedness to the spot, and analysis paralysis, and you work through the quantum entanglement with the toxicity of the past by left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, like EMDR, whatever, and evolve them ultimately to actualizing action. So there you go. So thank you, Ed. Yes, it's not specifically a seamless transitioning, but there's permission given for you to be privileging either cognitive or affective or relational or existential. This is why it's a care approach to healing, or in fact, more directive. So be cared because you cared, So the D, or constructivist, because model 5 is also about the construction of narratives and retelling the story. I kind of throw in a lot of stuff in my model 5.
Yeah, thank you, Martha. That's nice. A nice breath. I like that at the end of it.
That was there you go. My body heaved a sigh of relief here at having sort of articulated what I had wanted to say in response to Ed's wonderful comment. And all of the rest of you, and Michael and Robert and Adele and Brian and Teresa and the others who have, and Francis, who have thoughtfully offered me and Ed their thoughts here today. I really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you very much. We're now at 6:10 in the UK. So are we happy to wrap up the Q&A session and really remind everyone we have another masterclass presentation next Saturday?
And with it being understood that it's okay if you didn't get to masterclass 1. And so if you have friends and colleagues who might be interested, I'm going to really launch into models 1, 2, and 3, optimally stressful model 1 conflict statements, optimally stressful model 2 disillusionment statements, and optimally stressful relational interventions or accountability statements. And we're going to really play with that. It's going to be good, intensive, good. So talking a little bit more about a how-to guidebook for the middle game in psychodynamic psychotherapy, where we've laid the background, set the stage with our minimally stressful interventions, including our empathic statements. And now we ease more because we feel we have enough of an attachment, and the alliance is secure enough and consolidated enough, and the backdrop is there, empathic attunement, authentic engagement, whatever, that we're going to dare to try some optimally stressful in order to control damage, to jumpstart recovery and repair at ever higher levels of adaptability, integration, and balance. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Robert, did you want to say anything before we have our final part?
Yes.
Oh, yes, right.
We
have a little surprise here at the very end here.
Oh my God, it's bright. I loved my mother eventually. And what I liked about that was like, I eventually saw my actual mother.
Oh,
Yes.
Well, as it happens, I'm not quite sure where that came from, but that's very relevant for me.
Yes. I think that's the journey for most of us. To
Wow.
really come to see our actual mother, but also the actual world.
Oh my
So
that's
that's what
be
you
still my rapidly beating heart. Thank you, Robert. I mean, I feel, see, that's a beautiful something. And I feel it, I'm almost tears in my eyes. I mean, it's so relevant when I saw my actual mother, and my heart is just very happy. Thank you for saying that, Robert.
Yeah.
And relevant for all of us, right?
Well, thank you for the your saying that made that possible. So we're going to leave with a song.
So please stay on a little bit and let's dance together, if you will, please. It's one of my favorites. And Robert, bless his soul, has agrees to play a song at the end of each of my presentations here. And I just love it. I love it because
You know, I've forgotten which one it was you wanted.
oh, it's Uptown Funk.
Okay. That's Bruno Mars.
Bruno Mars, Uptown Funk. And it kind of